you for joining us today. My name is Stacy Huff, and I serve as the president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month here at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum or to make reservations, please visit our website at louisvilleforum.org. Today's topic is public events in Louisville. How safe are we? Over the years, Louisville has become a place known to hold large public events. Thunder Over Louisville, concerts at the Yum Center, the Kentucky State Fair, and music festivals like Bourbon and Beyond, just to name a few. Most of us probably didn't think twice about how safe we were 20 or 30 years ago, maybe even more recent than that. But these days, I find myself thinking of safety when I go to the movies. Unfortunately, in today's world, we can't control how safe an event is, but what are organizations, event planners, and other public safety officials doing to help keep us safe? Are there steps we as event attendees can take to be safer at events? Or God forbid something takes place, like a bomb or an active shooter, are there things we need to know so that we can get out safely? To provide us with more information, our very impressive panel, and I do mean impressive, has graciously agreed to share their expertise with us. Participating on our panel today is Mr. Matt Gibson, the newly selected president and CEO of the Kentucky Derby Festival, Greg Gitcher, former U.S. Secret Service agent, and Jody Myman, executive director of Louisville Metro Emergency Services. Let me begin with the introduction of Matt Gibson. As mentioned, Matt is the newly selected president and CEO of the Kentucky Derby Festival. He was most recently the senior vice president of events and operations and has been with the organization for 22 years. For much of his career, he oversaw the production and execution of the events and specializes in the science of a crowd, dynamics that include the movement, safety, security, and overall disaster and response planning for the over 60 events the organization produces. He works in conjunction with a multitude of Louisville Metro, state and federal government agencies with the goal of creating a safe experience for attendees at the festival's events. Matt has also participated in various readiness and preparedness multi-agency exercises with organizations that include Department of Homeland, FBI, and the ATF, to name a few. He also worked in disaster recovery and has been activated the last 2 hurricane seasons, responding to such large-scale events as Hurricane Irma, where he oversaw the construction of forward operation and staging bases for first responders and power restoration agencies. Matt is a Louisville native where he and his wife are raising 2 very active daughters. Without further ado, Matt Gibson.
Thank you all first for having me here today. I could probably speak a little bit from the introduction because that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. As Stacy was saying, when we attended events many, many years ago, you didn't think about the things you think about today. When I started as event manager 22 years ago, I celebrated 22 years on the day that I took over as president and CEO, and there's been a lot of reflection in that regard. As you look at events today, as she said, you look at going to movies differently. I mean, we think of nightclubs, any open-air event, festival events, schools, churches, any type of mass gathering in a scenario where they might call that a target-rich environment, you have to be aware of things. When I started 22 years ago, the things that we looked at were really non-intentional things, and it's what we focused on as an industry. It was things like weather. It's one of the best exercises that we use to train our staff, the folks that we work with, the people who attend our events. They're used to in outdoor events in spring in Kentucky, knowing that the weather can change at any any minute. I've seen so many bizarre things in my 22 years, leading edge lightning, hail that comes up in no time, that challenges all of our events and all of our folks. I was talking to one of our board members who's also a Louisville Forum board member, and the need to constantly dialogue what your role as not only an attendee, but a role as a board member or a staff member or those things, if you do work in events or you're a member of your church, or those are skill sets that you need to share with folks. And it's something that we've taken a very high level approach in training everybody that works with us through our events. For our events, when I first started, we would talk about emergency action plans, and it would be things like fires. It would be things like disruptive crowd. We serve alcohol at a lot of our events. We have a bourbon bill, we have a beer fest, a wine fest. You could see a trend here. And there are things that you would have to address. Now we start to talk about things that are active aggressor, active shooter, terms in our language that didn't exist when I first started doing this job. Our friend back here, Clay, who spends more time, I think, in our town than he does his hometown, comes in and has dialogues with us and challenges us to do things a whole lot differently than we've done in the past. Since Jody and I have worked together for the last handful of years, both of our roles have evolved as things like the Gilroy Garlic Festival show up in the news. Route 91 Harvest Music Festival that exists. We've learned a lot of best practices from that, and I'll let Jody talk a little bit about that as we go through. But it's more than just thinking of what could catastrophically happen at an air show or even a balloon event, those non-intentional things. If you've paid attention, it's dangerous to attend events anyway when there are things like hot air balloons going over crowds. How many people saw the information on the Albuquerque, New Mexico Fiesta event? I mean, that's a real thing. We've had similar scenarios in our festival over the years, and they're real things. When you're talking about the issues that face events, we've gotten to a point where we no longer try to write them all down because we say it's what keeps us up at night. We could spend all night sitting up and trying to dial it down about what things could happen, because we're getting into a realm of, it's almost a suspension of belief to have these dialogues. We started to put, as many of you know, it doesn't matter if you're in New York or if you're in Louisville, Kentucky, when you start to attend events nowadays, you see dump trucks at main entrances. You see police and law enforcement from a local to a federal agency level no longer doing as much plain clothes. You start to see them in what is their full-on kit. And that tends to send a completely different message than what it did 10 years ago. We used to have dialogue about talking about those law enforcement and public safety officials having a more background presence, because you didn't want people to feel like they were attending a militarized event for one reason or another. That sometimes would get some people excitable, but nowadays a lot of the mentality is put them out there, make them very visible. We still believe in the plan that a true safety and security plan is best left under wraps, that you don't put it all out there, but you do want your public to see that you do have a large presence there. So as you attend events nowadays, you wouldn't have seen these folks with their full-on vests and their dogs walking around with them, and walking around if they see crowds with backpacks or large groups of individuals, and starting to take an approach that wouldn't have been one that we wanted to see many years ago, but we now as mass gathering experts want to see a big presence. And we've got great partners, especially in this community, who have been doing it longer than most communities. With the 145th running of the Kentucky Derby Festival, or Kentucky Derby, coming up in 2020, the 64th Derby Festival, just 192 days away, not that anybody's counting. When you bring in 1.4 million folks on an annual basis, and that's just from the festival perspective, and hundreds of thousands more through Churchill, you really have to start to take that approach that the number one thing facing our entire industry right now isn't funding in an ever-challenging and ever-competitive atmosphere. It isn't trying to shoehorn this monster in this ever-growing and ever-increasing great town that we live in, but the number one thing that we talk about all the time, and the number one thing facing our industry, is safety at events, and that perception of safety as well. That goes a long way. Training your folks to see something, say something. It's been a campaign that's been around for a long time. How many people have ever seen a see something, say something, or have ever heard that term before? That's great. That means it's getting out there. It started in New York, I believe, wasn't it, the transit system, Clay or Jody? And it's been something that Homeland Security has helped us really get into our communities and events. Thank you. And really helps us teach the general public, something we would have never thought about, to teach the general public how to be aware at events. And things like the Gilroy Garlic Festival, we started to, I just got back from the International Festival Events Association, one of the groups that we have been involved with for many, many years. That changed the whole tone of our convention, because it's the first time beyond the music festival side that somebody had walked into a very small festival like that. They had defeated a fence and came in. Those folks, after dialogues, after the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival in Las Vegas, had changed their entire tune of how they address public safety and safety at events. And they were able to address that in minutes. I mean, it could have been something entirely different if they hadn't started to learn best practices from certain events that had happened in the community. We've been lucky after dialogues like Harvest Music Festival, the Boston bombing, to bring in big players in not only the response, but the event production, best practices guides, best practices dialogues, big tabletop exercises that even we've got coming up this year, to make sure that this community is very well prepared in the event that something should happen, from either an intentional or an unintentional, because you can apply those responses to either one of those scenarios. I will tell you that as we travel throughout different communities, it doesn't matter if it's Boston, it doesn't matter if it's New York, New Orleans, Florida. We do a lot of travel and consulting and things like that throughout the year when we're not producing the festival itself. We are very lucky in this community to have the folks that we work with. Jody and his folks, Louisville Metro Police, all of the different agencies that we work very closely with take the same perspective that we do, that we are going to have these events regardless, because this is a very event-friendly town. It's why you see things like Tri-Festa, Iron Man, and those come in. This town welcomes them with open arms. But you've also got great support in the partners here that look at it completely different than most cities in this country. And I, for one, have always felt like we've been on the very beneficial side of that, as I have dialogues with people in my roles, my previous roles, and even as an event manager when I was doing this for many, many years. Obviously, I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but I'll turn it back over to Stacy for the next guest. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Matt. Our next panelist is Greg Gitcher. Greg has been a police officer, U.S. Secret Service agent, and senior special agent, and is now a bodyguard and security consultant. Greg was a police officer in Louisville for 11 years and a Secret Service agent for more than 21 years. In the Secret Service, he worked as a bodyguard, criminal investigator, firearms instructor, fitness coordinator, and police task force supervisor. He was assigned full-time to protect President Ronald Reagan's family and has protected other heads of state and dignitaries, including the Queen of England, the Emperor of Japan, and Pope John Paul II. Greg is now a security consultant for numerous Kentucky and Indiana businesses, schools, and churches, and he was a senior member of the Louisville HURT hazmat SWAT team. He has worked with the largest grocery store chain in America and similar national and local organizations to prepare for active shooter situations, was security chairman for 6 major PGA events at Valhalla Golf Club, was security advisor for the Ryder Cup, and helped prepare and lead security for the 2015 Breeders' Cup. He attended 3 Olympic Games as a security planner and escort to GE and NBC senior executives, and also provided security to the 2016 National Republican Convention in Cleveland. Phew, that's a lot. For 5 years, Greg was a bodyguard for Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher, and when needed, he acts as a bodyguard for certain celebrities and CEOs. Gitcher is also a Louisville native and lives in Louisville, Kentucky, with his wife, daughter, and 2 sons. Let's give Greg a warm welcome.
Well, good afternoon. Just like church, good afternoon. By the way, I'm a deacon. I know some of y'all have to hear me preach sometimes, but anyways. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come here. This is a great crowd. I'm up here with some very high-level panelists. I'll try to do my part. You saw or you heard where I was in law enforcement for 30 years. How that applies to this environment is, even though I tried to retire, I was teaching terrorism classes in college, and because I was an intelligence agent for 6 years in Asia. So I thought I could give college students a perspective of terrorism and how it's being, how it's growing around the world. Then I got talked into writing a book, which I thought I'd never do, but it's been a great few months. The book has done very well, and it talks about these experiences, and I dedicated to Kids Cancer Alliance, charity I've been with for over 20 years. So it's a win-win, and I appreciate this opportunity. In the world of terrorism, or let's talk about mass shooters real quick, and I'll be happy to answer any questions with these gentlemen. But I tried to keep a low profile, but once I did my kids' school for a vulnerability assessment, other schools started asking me, then other churches started asking me, and then businesses, warehouses, assembly lines. So both for local companies and national companies, I do vulnerability assessments for them, which is basically what's the outside threat. So I try to give them a very bird's eye view of some fresh set of eyes on where they're vulnerable. Well, due to recent news events, that has now become active shooter training. So I'd say now for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing active shooter training for some of these same schools, churches, businesses, factories, warehouses. It's just unfortunate, but I think people realize now that, you have to react very quickly once those shots are heard. And so I go through about an hour-long class, always getting approved by the HR department, because obviously you walk in a fine line there. But I want people to react quickly and correctly in those moments they have to their highest chance of survival. So I feel like now, even though I don't advertise my business, I don't even have a business card, I get it all word of mouth, but I feel like now I've been inspired to go out and help as many people as I can if there is an active shooting situation. In the Secret Service, we're taught situational awareness at all times. I've worked in 70 countries around the world. I've seen some really good and some really bad countries and how things work and don't work, and the threat level. But you have to have that situational awareness, what's going on around you. If something happens, what can I do quickly to save myself and others? I've done this for the Kroger managers in this region of the United States. And, I'm sure they never thought they would have a shooting, but obviously in J-Town they did have one a year ago. And, I was really happy to see how well they reacted to that, how awesome the first responders were in responding to that. As someone who's been on both sides of it, when I worked for the PGA, we had 61,000 people on a golf course in Minneapolis a few years ago. That was a real challenge. As a hazmat team, SWAT team guy, for 10 years, we worked on all the Thunder over Louisville situations, which is very scary when you think about all the military flights and all the people on the Great Lawn. And, our concern was, of course, we were there from a dirty bomb aspect. We worked probably another 10 or 12 derbies doing the same thing. But, how we could respond to that. But what was really concerning, and I didn't even let my own kids go there as teenagers because I was afraid they'd get trampled in their response if there was a shooting or an explosion or some kind of event, because that many people in such a tight area was a huge concern of mine. But I just thought the police department and the Derby prep people and everyone involved just do their tremendous job because, like Matt just said, when I worked the PGA events, the PGA did not want to see SWAT officers walking around a golf course. But, when I work in foreign countries, I see counter-terrorist uniforms everywhere. I just got back from a pilgrimage from Rome, and you couldn't go to an event without having counter-terrorist guys with machine guns walking next to you. It's just the way the world is now. So Louisville does a wonderful job. I mean, you've heard of all the things they do, and these two guys are just really, keeping it up, and I think they could set the example from other places in the country. I'm happy to lend whatever experience I have to keep this community safe. I was born here. I raised my 3 children here, and I've had the opportunity to serve this wonderful city as a law enforcement officer for 11 years, and then come back and retire here as a Secret Service agent. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Greg. All right. Our third panelist is Jody Myman. Since June 2016, Jody has served as the Executive Director for Louisville Metro Emergency Services, overseeing Louisville-Jefferson County Metro Emergency Management, Metro Safe, 911, 311 Center, Louisville Metro EMS, and Special Events. Jody holds an associate degree in Fire and Safety Technology and retired as a battalion chief with the Louisville Division of Fire and Rescue after 20 years of service. He also spent 23 years and retired as an assistant chief from the Lake Dreamland Volunteer Fire Department in southwest Jefferson County. Jody was a lead instructor at Industrial Safety and Training Services from 2005 through 2016, traveling the country, performing course development at all levels of competency for OSHA, hazardous materials, and Homeland Security training initiatives, including emergency response to chemical, biological, nuclear, radiological, and explosive weapons of mass destruction, and response to terrorism. He routinely consults and trains with other state, local, and private sector clients on National Incident Management System compliance, National Response Framework components, hazmat program development, and emergency management protocols to ensure coordinated relationships among response organizations and industry promoting sound preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation practices. Please join me in welcoming Jody.
Thank you, and as the other panelists have said, thank you very much for the opportunity. As horrible a subject as this is to talk about, our job in emergency management is to get out and talk about, we deal with preparedness, we deal with the response, and we deal with the recovery. And, this is something that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about, see something, say something, but it starts at home, and that's what we're really trying to get the message out to now. Just in the last several years, we've really started to get this out, like Matt said, in some of these special events. You're starting to see SWAT dressed out as SWAT, where before they were behind the scenes, they were undercover. And to be honest with you, the public loves it. It was a really hard sell to get these special event producers, some of them, to do that. But you're seeing kids getting their pictures with them, and you're seeing people, talk to them and things like that. So we really try to look at historically what has gone on. And many of you may remember, we're just coming off the 30-year anniversary to the Standard Gravure shooting that we had here in Louisville, which obviously was a horrible event. So we've already been put on the map here with one of these workplace shootings. Along with the special events, we have to look at school safety. We have to look at public and private entity safety. We really have to get a consistent message out to how people need to prepare, how people need to respond, and then, like I said, probably the most difficult thing is how do people recover from this, from the mental aspect or the mental recovery to, the workplace recovery and things like that. So we take a look at all these different events that happen, not only in the United States but over the world, and we look to see at each one of them when the after actions come out and all through the process leading up to when those are published. What gaps do we have? We've done active shooter and terrorism response for many, many years, especially coming off of 9/11. But one of the great things about this community that both the other panelists can relate to is we've got really good relationships here because of the Kentucky Derby Festival. Back to our special event planning that goes on into the early 90s, our motto in emergency response is you never want to meet on the hood of a car. So, as much as people move along and they get new jobs and come back, as I have and some others, but, we don't want to meet there. So we do all this special event planning all through the year to where, we even know who the experts are with the producers of these special events, and we invite them. Matt's on our planning team for one of our very large complex coordinated terrorist attack scenarios that we're going to put on in the spring of next year. So we look at all these different events, and if you think back to Columbine, the Columbine shooting and the mentality of law enforcement then, a lot of it was to secure the scene, and you waited for the SWAT team to come in. And we really went away from that. And the first big event that happened after that, where we started to see some different effects, was the Virginia Tech shooting. So now we're starting to put first responders, as far as EMS and the fire service, in the building, potentially even in a situation where there still might be some shooting or something like that going on inside the building, we'll put them in the building to try to take care of these people along with the law enforcement. This is, in my career, the best or the most intermingled that police, fire, and EMS have been together. In years past, if there was a fire, police would be there in their role, and EMS would be there in their role. If there was a law enforcement event, fire would be there in standby, and EMS the same. This is the first time, like I said, the fire and EMS have had to learn SWAT tactics. The SWAT team has to learn that, they're in there to protect those people. I started the fire service when I was 19 years old. I've got a son that started. He's 19 as well. If you'd have told me when I was 19 years old that firefighters today would be wearing bulletproof ballistic equipment, I'd have told you you was full of it. That's just not what our role was. But I think about how times have changed since I started when I was 19, and my son has now started, and he's 19 as well. And the things that we're having to teach to protect ourselves, not only in our jobs, but like I said, at home, we really are trying to get that preparedness aspect out. To you need to be prepared when you're in church. You need to be prepared when you're at the grocery store. Look at the Walmart shooting that just recently happened in El Paso, Texas. All these things we have to do, and we're finally starting to get the reality to people that it can happen anywhere. Unfortunately, it is. It's just like if you go into a building and there's a fire alarm that goes off. We've been prepared to do that and take care of ourselves and know what to do when that happens anywhere. And this is the new norm. Unfortunately, it's the new thing that we have to think about. So presently, we're constantly working with event producers and special events. We just had the Trifesta. The producers for the Trifesta were great to work with as well. Something that we put out there was a new venue. We really had to look at the emergency operations planning. We were on site as emergency management personnel in case something did happen. But there was people on buildings. We practiced really good for many years inside of schools, inside of buildings, when we talked about dealing with active shooters and terroristic events. And then Las Vegas happened. And if you can imagine, 11 minutes start to finish, 422 people were shot and 58 were killed by gunfire. So 11 minutes. It's a very quick time. So, very quickly after that happened, I think the next day Matt and I were on the phone with each other because I couldn't take my eyes off the television overnight watching that to say, what are we missing? With specifically Thunder over Louisville and the special events that are around hotels. So we brought the Hotel Association very aggressively into our special event planning for that. For something like that, there's actually been an ordinance passed here in Louisville very recently where every floor or every 10 floors in our buildings downtown are marked, so that public safety officials can not only during an active shooter situation, but if they pull up on a fire or something like that, they can look at these buildings very quickly and don't have to count every floor. So that's some of the things, like I said, that we learned. Matt and I are looking to make February a month that we bring somebody in from the outside that has unfortunately experienced one of these events. Last year we brought 3 members from the Las Vegas community in. We had over 400 of our first responders from local, state, and federal jurisdictions that came in and was able to attend this 8-hour presentation from law enforcement, from fire and EMS, and then from the hospital and the difficulties that they went through there. So we're constantly looking at these things to like I said, to see what gap we've got. We got a complex coordinated terrorist attack grant that Clay's working with us on, and he was able to come in, bring a team of his people in to do a gap analysis, and this was a grant that we got between not only Louisville but the state of Kentucky and the state of Indiana. We got the third largest grant award of $2.1 million to be able to facilitate tabletop exercises, a lot of training, and then we're going to do a full-scale functional exercise in March of 2020 that's going to involve both the state of Indiana and the state of Kentucky on both sides of the river. We wrote that grant based on a scenario of an attack at Thunder over Louisville. We get a lot of attention because of Thunder over Louisville, because of the number of people. But I can tell you from the aggressive planning that Matt's team and the first responders have done for several years, it's very easy to start that process. We've already started that process, and you come in. But like I said, we've got a handful of events that have taken place, the Garlic Festival specifically, that we automatically have to keep looking at our gaps and where we could potentially be missing something out there. One of the things that we also were able to do was we have what's called an integrated public alert and warning system. So now we can send cross-state boundary alerts in a situation like this. We set it up for all of our special events now that we can send an alert. We've got Lens Alert, Louisville Emergency Notification System here in Louisville. That's a proactive thing that people have to sign up for. The good thing about the IPAWS, or the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, is that we can send it and you get it whether you have signed up or not. So if we have to send an alert out during a festival, evacuate, or something may be going outside and we need them to move to certain locations within the venue or anything like that, we can send these canned messages out to these people. And we've tested it. We tested it at the Trifesta the week before Hometown Rising started. So like I said, that's a very good capability that we have. So we'll answer any questions that you've got. Again, I thank you for the opportunity and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jody. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions now to be presented by our board members, Iris Wilbur and Keith Larson. So I encourage you, if you continue to have questions, to write them down and hold them up, and someone will come get them. So, Keith?
Sure, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We've been getting a lot of questions about school safety. Do you think that all schools should have armed guards or some sort of a police presence? And this is for all the panelists.
Greg, you want to take that one?
Yeah, we both looked at Greg.
Yeah.
The man.
I'm a big fan of, okay, I'll put it this way. I've been a gun toter for over 30 years. I'm a carry conceal instructor. I still teach gun safety to people, because if they make that choice to carry a gun, I want them to have the finest training and know how to handle it and how to store it and everything. When I get the question about schools, I have to fall back that the only person who's going to stop a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. That doesn't mean to maybe give it to teachers or anything like that. I think we have to look a little further into that subject. But to me, retired law enforcement, there are a lot of retired law enforcement people or retired military people that have tremendous amount of training. And if they can pass the psychological test to be in a school situation with a weapon, then I would personally be for it.
Do you guys have any comment? Anything to add?
I don't think there's any better answer than the one that he gave. I mean, as the guy that goes around and has those discussions, I mean, and as a parent, I would agree 100% with that.
Okay, thank you. Iris or Keith? Keith?
Sure.
Okay.
For all of you, would you ever or have you ever recommended canceling an event because you received a threat and didn't feel it was safe to proceed?
We do get some threats for special events. The really good thing about this community is we have the Louisville Metro Police-owned real-time crime center. So a lot of these threats, if not most of them, come through social media. They are constantly watching and can investigate these threats. LMPD also has a very good team that can investigate them. So when they do, if it came to the level of this thing seems real or we can't get in touch with the people, absolutely, we would potentially cancel that. Or, now we have also put more security at events because of some specific threats, but we would consider it. We haven't had to do that yet.
And even from the event producer perspective, we stay very in tune with them. And I could tell you, in my 22 years, there have probably been more threat discussions, even credible threat discussions, that we've had leading into events. We've had high-level dialogues with people in the community, done joint press conferences with Louisville Metro Police. But there are times where we're having dialogues about a backpack. I mean, that's the world we live in now today. In a marathon scenario after 2013, if you see a backpack by itself, that's a credible threat, and that's the kind of dialogue that you're having and what steps you take. But that goes back to what Jody was saying. You don't have these dialogues for the first time on the hood of a car. You have these dialogues months in advance. And you talk about tolerances for this, about where you are, how credible the threat is, because it goes down to weather too. I mean, it's not just intentional things, active aggressor, those types of things. Weather is a big factor here in this community, and we're having these dialogues, which really tests our systems year after year after year. We saw the weirdest lightning event that I've ever seen in my 46 years on this planet the night leading into the mini marathon in 2016. 16. Jody was actually running it, but I pulled him off the course for the dialogue.
I was participating.
Yes, he was. He was participating. And we had that dialogue. We got some of our partners from local media to bring in their, because we didn't know what we were seeing. We'd never seen anything like it. And what didn't even come from a weather notice. It came from the folks that were putting our fencing out. And they wouldn't even touch their trucks because it was all metal. And we started to have those dialogues at 2 a.m. in the morning to have those discussions about what happens and the science of weather and all of those things. So we have a lot of those incredible threat discussions in so many different facets year after year. So it's something that's really tried and tested on a constant basis.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything to add, Greg? No. Okay. Iris?
Hi. So we had a couple of different versions of this question, but essentially, how does the media affect our perceptions around safety?
Obviously, that's one that I think is a very broad answer because social media has to be included in that as well. A lot of the dialogues that we have are based on from our perspective, we start to look at it not only what happened, but the mitigation process immediately after. So we start to look at where the data comes from, and it could be not only a traditional media platform that is getting the information out there, but it's social media as well. Something that we watched after the Boston bombing, it wasn't only the traditional media who got information out there, the biggest impact was from a social media perspective that created a lot of the information and misinformation at the same time. We as an event producer and public safety managers have to get to the basis of that, especially when you're right in a few minutes after. Like Jody was saying in the Route 91 Harvest Festival issue, it was 11 minutes. A lot can happen in 11 minutes. A lot can happen in 1 minute. So from our perspective, when it's actually happening, you have to be able to weed through what's actually going on. Not all the time are all of our staff or all of his staff or even the professionals on site. You're doing it from a remote time. So we have to really start to delineate what the true information is and how we respond to it almost immediately. I guess from the traditional side, and anybody jump in at the same time, it's an all news all the time atmosphere that we live in. So there's a lot of dialogue that will happen because of current things happening in politics. The Albuquerque, New Mexico balloon crash may not be big to folks, but on a different day, it could have been what populated the news media for that day. Obviously, when the Gilroy Garlic Festival happened, it was all over the place, and there's a lot of, even reading through some of it today and preparing for this, there was different stories that took different approaches and had different information. So I think some of it can be challenging at times, but from our perspective, having that access to the information on a constant basis is very helpful. I mean, almost immediately.
And that's one of the things that we do is during our larger events, we form a joint information center so that if we see something on social media, we try to get it to our local media as quick as we can to try to let them know, if that's false or if it's actually verified. If you talk to the fire chief of Las Vegas, the Metropolitan Fire Department in Las Vegas, or Clark County Fire Department, he will say that they literally thought they were under attack because they were getting so many different social media and 911 calls where people had left that venue and ended up at one of the other casinos down the strip, and when they would call 911, they would say there's a person shot at the Bellagio. Well, it went in as a shooting at the Bellagio. So they had 19 different occurrences that they thought they had either active shooter or acts of terrorism that were going on at the same time. So us trying to get out ahead of that and verify that and as quick as we can, we will get to the local media and say, this is what we've got, this is what we know, and this is what we're doing right now to take care of that, to make sure that information can be verified.
A couple comments, just to back up what they're saying is it's important to have a one-voice policy because once the fire department or the first responders or the mayor's office or whoever, governor, if they respond as a one-voice policy, then the information doesn't get scrambled and taken in different ways. The media is so quick, and with social media, that they start interviewing people right away, and you start getting all these, different opinions, or I think this is what happened, or I think there was 20, terrorists instead of 2, or whatever. So that one-voice policy is important. Another thing to think about is that I like the way that media stop sensationalizing the perpetrator, where they make him look like he gets this international fame for killing people that other copycat people might try to copy. So I think it's good that they don't sensationalize him by putting his picture and name up all over. I think that's a wonderful move. One of the other things regarding social media is the Secret Service did analysis of all the shooters in the past several years, and they all had similar traits. They all felt like they were wronged by somebody. Okay, they had a score to settle, but also they shopped the idea around to people, and a lot of times it was on social media. And I've had situations where companies hired me here where someone got fired. It got very messy, where the guy was on social media with an automatic weapon saying, "I'll show them what firing is all about." So I'm just saying, see something, say something comes a part of the social media too, because most of these shooters, these active shooters, mass shooters, have already talked to somebody about this. Hey, what do you think if I did this to the boss, or if I did this to my principal, or whatever? So that's why if they see something on there, it's very important that they monitor those things.
Great. Thank you. Iris?
Another question, actually we had several, and I'm going to kind of bunch them all together. Many folks in the room go to school, go to work, are responsible for a business or an organization. What are some real life tips all of us can kind of take away today to improve safety or just to be more alert?
Well, the biggest thing is what was said earlier was, just situational awareness. That's just not for first responders. That's for anybody out there. My family knows when I go to a restaurant, I sit with my back where I can see the door. I mean, it's little things like that you've just got to be aware of your surroundings. If you see something that's out of place, note that. Like they said, there's several of these events. There was clues out there that were before the actual event. In the Parkland shooting, it was up to 2 years before that shooting that they were investigating that shooter for similar type of social media posts and things like that. So, the biggest thing is just don't be scared about anything that you want to do. If you want to do something, then go and do it. These special events, know that on our side, we're working with the producers, we're working with law enforcement, we're working to make it as safe as we can for you all, the public, and anybody that attends these events. So just be aware of your surroundings.
I think when you look at your business, your church, your school, first of all, protect yourself from an outside threat. I mean, it's common sense. You have some. I did a school, I won't say the name, recently, that every morning they open up 26 doors for an hour. There's no reason I don't care how big the campus is, and I don't care how many students are there. You don't need to open up 26 doors for an hour. I mean, you're inviting trouble. So you have to protect yourself from the outside threat first. And then once you have that, you have to have good access control. The access control is important because it scans people coming in, and if you have an emergency, it can scan people going out, whether it's the ID card in their pocket or on their belt. You can have the access control monitor who comes and goes. In an emergency situation, when the fire department and paramedics show up, it's nice to know how many people got out. So you have all those plans that, where to meet during a fire or during bad weather or whatever, or active shooter. A lot of schools don't do critical or active shooter training because it's too scary. Well, I'll be honest with you. I think fires are pretty damn scary. I think a tornado coming at my building is pretty damn scary. So why not change the words from active shooter to critical incident so it doesn't sound as bad, but you still need to do critical incident response. And and you have to let those people know where is the safe place to go. If it's an internal threat, everything's upside down now, because that person who, like the young man in Miami High School, he knew where the fire drill would go. He pulled the fire drill. He knew where the kids would go. So he had inside information. So we also have to consider that, in a recent company I did, they had a big office place, and then they had a warehouse behind it. Well, their rule was during a critical incident, everybody runs into the warehouse. Well, this is the guy that had the automatic weapon. That's not a good thing. So you have to put your plans together and work on these things in your culture with your HR department of how to react to these certain situations. Trust me, when that 911 call goes out on an active shooter, the cavalry is coming. Lights and sirens, a ton of guns are coming to your rescue. You just have to stay alive until they get there. So that's why if you're going to run, you got to hide, you got to fight, whatever it is, you have to help that as part of your training. I think as a CEO, president, or manager, you owe that to your people and your customers to have some level of forethought of what's going to happen.
There had been some comments earlier about consulting with other countries or visiting other countries to see how they handle these situations. This questioner wants to know, which countries do you think have the best systems in place, and what can we learn from them?
As the guy who's traveling.
I've been to a lot of countries, but some countries. Well, I've worked in a lot of third world countries where it's a military dictatorship, so everything's at the end of a gun. So if they say clear the streets because this street will be cleared, they have 50 caliber machine guns on Jeeps clearing the street, and you better be off the street. So it depends on what country you're in. When we flew to England, England was the strictest. Our closest friend was the strictest country about guns. Officially, Secret Service was not allowed to carry guns in England. Okay? Officially, we weren't allowed to carry guns in Australia, another great friend, because of their gun laws. We do what we have to do to protect the President of the United States. I'll just leave it at that. So it just depends on what country you're with. You have to respect their laws, but they have to know that if they invite a president or vice president or former president from the United States to their country, it's a package deal, and we come with it. So depending on their threat level, that's the important thing. What's the threat level of an African country or an Asian country or a South American country, and then you have to gear your security to match that threat level, or else you're going to be overrun and you're going to lose.
And I guess the follow-up question is there anything that you think we can learn from how other countries handle these situations?
I think the IC community, the intelligence community, do share things back and forth, and certainly something that works in a country like America, England, Germany, France, then we can also share information, which I hope they do. I assume they do. I used to work with the intelligence community that, after 9/11, we learned very quickly how important it is to share information and don't try to protect your assets or your confidential informant. So I just think having an open discussion, because things that you can do in some countries you could not get away with here and vice versa.
And that's something, too, that we look at is we don't just look at what went wrong. We look at what went right to see that, if there's something that we're not doing that we should be doing. And, we're going to test something in March that this community's never tested before, and that's a multifaceted attack in several different locations, as in like a Paris attack that they went through over there. So, the response community is got a lot of good things going, for unfortunate circumstances that we're going to be able to test here in the next few months.
Okay, next question. I want to preface it that the lines of questions that I'm about to read are not about sort of the gun laws debate. And so with that being said, the Kentucky General Assembly and the governor just signed recent legislation that changed the requirements around concealed carry and the permitting of that. And so with that, how has that changed the way you all operate, the way you work with clients, events, moving forward, particularly now that that's the law of the land here in the Commonwealth?
I'll touch on that one. We've been dealing with open carry laws here in the state of Kentucky as long as I've been in the business world, and especially in the events world. And it's been something that we've talked about many, many times. We produce our events on public property in many, many cases, so we have to follow those laws. And we have no ability to keep folks from in a different climate than we're in 2019 going into 2020 from carrying an AR-15 onto the Thunder venue if they wanted to. I think anybody would be crazy to do it now because of the attention they would get, but there have been many times that you've seen people with 6 guns on or openly carrying because the laws support that, and we have to build a safety structure at our events that addresses it whether you see it or you don't. The guns have always been there in this community. It's just the nature of this town, and the laws protect them as such. So we've always built those structures, trained our staff, our board, our volunteers to be aware that that could be present. In those scenarios, it doesn't mean that they're not getting attention, because like Jody said, with the Real-Time Crime Center, the cameras, just the folks that we have that are still behind the scenes, all of those folks that are pointed or identified are watched. We don't watch, it's hard to watch everybody now that everyone can conceal, but you always assume that they're there. We've always operated under the assumption that they're there, whether they are kid-friendly events, whether they're a mini marathon, Thunder, where alcohol is present, Chow Wagons Festival, those types of things. So we've always operated like they're present. It really doesn't change our perspective because, we live in Kentucky, and those laws have always been protected. So.
Matt, I have a question regarding that.
Yeah.
So can you put up a firearms prohibitive sign if it's a public property or?
We had the county attorney look at that. Gosh, it's probably been 5, 6, 7 years ago, because we did have one up. We took a very shallow approach to it and said, well, we're permitting this, but we were challenged on it.
I got you.
And legally, we couldn't, because the rights of the land, regardless of our permitted use, whether it be waterfront park, the surrounding streets or the like, protected those laws before it did our want to keep those out. So, and we've abided by that since. So.
Okay.
We probably have time for one more question.
How were the police able to take out the shooter at the Gilroy Garlic Festival so quickly?
We talked about that a lot. Some of my peers in the industry were present there this 2 weeks ago. Because of the climate that we live in and produce events in, and again, you have to be aware at church, school, grocery store, any open-air event, nightclubs, et cetera, their law enforcement were present and were very visible. They had upped their security budget by a significant amount and had brought in a high number of folks. It's their belief that that's what drove him to come in from through the gates, through the fence itself, as opposed to through the gates, because of the very high presence. They had gone to, not wanding, but searching everybody that came through very controlled points. So it drove him to come in through the fence, and as soon as they heard it, they were able to respond. They had some very high-level folks there, and they were in full kit. It wasn't an undercover scenario. There were off-duty law enforcement and on-duty law enforcement present, and that's how they were able to do it. So a very high level of law enforcement there that day. I mean, really, they addressed him in just under a minute and a half, which is what led to such a low injury and death rate. So.
Often at outdoor events with large capacity of people, security has been kind of far down the budget, first responders and security, and I think now you see it's starting to get more attention because they don't want to pay a lot of the money for the off-duty police officers or reimburse the city for the on-duty police officers and fire department, paramedics, and ambulance. But now I think people realize that it's something that needs to get more attention because it is the way of the world right now. And even if was it the Dayton, Ohio shooting, the nightclub, where I think they responded in less than 30 or 40 seconds and neutralized the subject, killing people. So I think it's worth the investment.
It is. And
if
you
you have
get
to
to a
have
point where you don't have to wait for SWAT. I mean, they're all trained to be the ones who go in the building. And that's one of the mentalities here in this community as well. And it goes back to this community is so lucky to have the support structure and public safety structure that it does, because they look at it completely different than a lot of our peers all across the country. And I'm talking large festivals and large states. New York looks at it different. Boston looks at it different, even after those events. And we're very lucky in this community that we've got experts that have been doing it longer than anybody else, really. So.
Great. Well, thank you. That was a great sum up to, I think, our conversation today. And we are very thankful that all you guys are in our community. So let's give them a round of applause. So on behalf of the entire Louisville Forum, again, we thank you for being with us today. And as an expression of our appreciation, we will make a donation on your behalf to a charitable organization that our board has pre-selected. Our next meeting will be held on Wednesday, November 13th And we are this close to announcing the topic, but we need to secure our panelists first. We have the questions or the request out. So be looking for that announcement to be coming probably within the week. And we'll post it on our website and get our emailed invitations out as well. When we do send those out, you can make reservations by visiting our website at louisvilleforum.org or calling our voicemail at 329-0111. Thanks for coming and have a great day.